Welcome to Live, Work, Thrive. I'm Michaela Birmingham, Scary Mommy Executive Producer, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel. Now, this holiday season is approaching, and it's packing even more stress this year than usual. So many of us are struggling with how to shape our holiday plans around the risks, the worries, and the traditions. With COVID-19 on the rise, there is no easy solution for many of us. Now, tonight's panel will provide fact-based information that hopefully can help guide you to make the decisions that are right for your family this holiday. From what masks actually work, to how much do you have to crack open the window, to the impact on our loved ones, we will be talking about it all. So settle in for some badass women scientists who are about to drop important knowledge. Now let's meet our panelists. We have Taylor McElwam, epidemiologist from Johns Hopkins Medicine. Thank you for being with us tonight, Taylor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And we have Dr. Shelley Miller, professor of mechanical engineering at University of Colorado, Boulder. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Miller.
Thanks for the invitation. It's great.
And later on, we'll be hearing from Dr. Janice Johnson-Dias, who is an author and president of the Grassroots Community Foundation, as well as Dr. Paula Bloom, clinical psychologist and author. Before we get started, we have a few quick reminders for our audience. You can submit questions and interact in the chat room, and we may feature your question later on in the show. So if you're wondering about something and you want one of our experts to answer it, hit us up with your question. Mobile users can also email your questions to liveworkthrive@scarymommy.com. And if you are one of the first 100 to RSVP tonight, look out for your free gift. This cool mask from the Scary Mommy shop will be headed your way. So sign up early for all of our upcoming events and to get your own free gift. Okay, so let's dive into tonight's topic. I got an alert from CNN last Friday that said, start quarantining now if you plan on gathering for Thanksgiving. Yikes. So if anyone watching is not already in quarantine, Houston, we have a problem, literally. Let's start talking about location, because that seems to be at the root of evaluating a lot of the risk involved in holiday activities. So Taylor, let's start with you. How does visiting someone else's home increase your risk of contracting COVID-19?
That's a great question. So generally, when we're talking about risks, we generally talk about it in terms of who's in your bubble. So you generally have a good idea of the risks that those in your bubble are taking, whether they're essential workers, if you have children who are in school, you are aware of those risks. Unfortunately, when you bring someone into your home or a group of people into your home, you can't be quite as sure about the risks that they may or may not have taken in the past 2 weeks. And vice versa, if you're going into somebody else's home, you might not know the risks that that household may or may not have been taking in the past 2 weeks. So really, you're expanding your bubble and multiplying your risk by as many people as might be in that household. In addition to that, you're spending time with people. You might be touching high-touch surfaces that could potentially be contaminated with COVID. And these are all things to consider when you're thinking about going to someone else's home for the holidays.
So essentially, when you make a visit to another home, your bubble just quadrupled or, expanded by however many other people are in that home and however many people they've been in contact with. Is that fair to say?
Exactly.
Okay. So now, Dr. Miller, you are a ventilation expert. First of all, 3 cheers for badass women in engineering, because we need more to prevent the next pandemic. Am I right?
You're right.
Okay. So I'm going to play a video that you created that it explains the concept of aerosol transmission. I think this is really key for folks to understand. And then we're going to talk about why household transmission can happen so easily. And we'll dive deeper into that subject. So here is the clip now.
Let's talk about transmission of respiratory infectious diseases. This transmission route is called airborne or aerosol transmission. Some people think of an aerosol spray can of deodorant when they hear the word aerosol, but really an aerosol is just a bunch of particles suspended in the air.
Getting infected this way could happen by either being close up to a person, called short-range aerosol transmission, or when you're far away from a person, called long-range aerosol transmission. Animal studies, air sampling, and super spreading show that SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted by breathing in aerosols.
SARS-CoV-2 is an overdispersed pathogen like SARS and measles. This means as few as 10% of people transmit 80% of the infections, and many people barely transmit. Most infections happen within households, where one or two other people may be infected within your own bubble. Also unique to SARS-CoV-2 is that many transmissions are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, so you literally have no idea who is infectious. People are most infectious right before they have symptoms of the disease.
So I love this video because it just really breaks down everything in super easy to understand terms. And fun fact, that's Dr. Shelley Miller and her adorable daughter narrating that video. So if you want to see the full thing, you can go to scarymommy.com/live.work.thrive. There's a link that plays the full 4-minute video, which I highly recommend. But let's talk more about this as it relates to a home at Thanksgiving. Dr. Miller, tell us, why is the air circulation in a home different than, say, that of a restaurant or a larger commercial building?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Homes are ventilated really differently. So in a restaurant or in office space or even a hospital, we bring in outside air through a system we call a mechanical ventilation system. And it brings in outside air, and then it takes the inside air and blows it outside. But with homes, we don't have any of that equipment. We have just decided over the many decades of building homes that we're going to ventilate our homes by opening windows. And then otherwise, air will just leak in through cracks and unintentional openings to add a little bit of extra air. So you'll find that most homes are actually poorly ventilated compared to some more commercial kinds of spaces.
Wow. So Taylor, based on this, would you say that even with a window open in a home, sitting around a table, making chit chat before you eat your meal, could you still inhale or make contact with droplets or airborne particles that might get you sick, even if you were, sitting at a table with windows open?
Absolutely. We know that respiratory droplets can go up to 6 feet when somebody talks, sneezes, or coughs, and aerosols float in the air. And it definitely takes that mechanical ventilation that Dr. Miller was talking about in order to remove them properly. So just opening a window really would not be sufficient to prevent transmission of COVID.
So let's be clear. 6 feet apart at a table is not really feasible unless you live like in a castle situation, right? Nobody is really realistically that far away. So sitting at the table, windows open, still a risk. Got it. Okay. So
can I add a little
yes,
bit there?
Sure.
I was just thinking that when the windows aren't open, it's quite risky. But when you open the windows, it does start to decrease your risk. So I want people to know that there is research that shows as you open your windows more and more, you get more and more air changes per hour in your home. So your risk does start to go down. And so that's what we have to just keep in mind.
Okay, so that leads me to my question that really personally I want to know for my own reasons, but I'm sure others out there are wondering this. It's starting to get cold outside, all right? And so for us women who are always on the cold side, how much does the window need to be open for this air circulation to really provide some benefit? And do you need 2 windows open? Like, my husband always says in the summer, you need cross ventilation, otherwise the wind doesn't blow. So break it down for us with the engineering logic. How freezing do I have to be? And do you need both windows open?
Yeah. I mean, I think that any opening is better than nothing, honestly. And then if you can even open it halfway and even one window, you're adding quite a bit of fresh air to your space. And your husband's right. It is great to have cross ventilation and have more windows open, but it can get really cold. And so, you have to understand that and plan for that. And I think you can also layer on other approaches to reduce your risk as well if you can't bring yourself to opening all the windows in your house.
Sure. And would that be, just to follow up, be similar to if you were in a car? Because I know they say that being, let's say you were in a taxi or an Uber, um, cracking the window versus keeping it all the way down is just offering you more or less ventilation. Would that be fair to say?
Definitely. And even turning on your vent that brings in outside air and you can heat it, that also helps to add ventilation as well. And so that's really important when you're in a car and you're having to share the air with somebody you don't know.
Got it. Okay. So turn on the vent on blast in the car. So does it have to, like, what about the heat? Is the heat a good thing or a bad thing? Does it matter if it's heat or cold air?
I don't think it matters. What do you think, Taylor?
No, I don't think it matters. Really, we just want to make sure that we're removing the viral particles as quickly as possible.
Got it. Okay. So Taylor, let's think about now, many of us are doing a great job. Our families are following the protocols. We're wearing the masks. We're opening windows whenever possible. We're working from home. But some of us might have our kids still going to school at some level, whether it's hybrid or 1 day a week or even full-time in-person learning. So Taylor, I want to ask you, do kids who are at in-person school elevate your risk, even though your family might be otherwise following all the precautions? Is that a consideration to make when contemplating visiting other family members?
Absolutely. We've seen with children, especially with SARS-CoV-2, they may be asymptomatic carriers. And in addition to that, we know that children in general aren't great at physical distancing. They can be kind of goopy to begin with. And we know that adults aren't great at social distancing or masking. And so when you have a child who's, whether they're in elementary school or even college age, I think it's really important to consider them at least moderate, if not higher risk, because they're around so many people and they tend to not be the best at social distancing and mask wearing. And the way that they are impacted by SARS-CoV-2 might make it difficult for them to recognize that they're infected.
Got it. So for your family who's in the bubble, doing a play date with another family whose kids are going to school, you're opening up that bubble, essentially, is what you're saying. Got it.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about food, because the holidays are very focused around food. I'm so excited about this meal that I'm going to have with no one except my own family this year. But let's talk about specific types of food. Dr. Miller, are there some foods that cause more droplet spray than others? Like, will we ever share guac and chips again? Are hot wings going to cause a super spreader situation in a house? I'm curious.
Oh, that's such a good question. I do think you still need to follow our original ideas where we, maybe make a plate of appetizers for each person or each couple. I remember having a dinner with friends at their house, but outside, and we each had our own little spread of appetizers, and nobody else dug into them but ourselves. And I still think those kinds of protocols are worth following. We don't see a lot of evidence of surface transmission, but just enough that I'm sure it's still important to follow really basic hygiene and don't share your food and keep your alcohol wipes and your soap handy.
Got it. Okay. So Taylor, to add to that, if you're setting up a spread at your house, is passing plates around the table a better approach, or buffet style? Which is, give the moms here some help on how we're setting up the food.
So I think the safest way would probably be to do buffet style. And if I were to set it up, I would ensure that there's lots of alcohol-based hand sanitizer so that people can clean their hands before they touch the utensils. Make sure that there are utensils around so that people aren't going in barehanded and grabbing food. I know my family loves to do that. And also, I would require that people wear masks while they are getting their food and encourage them to not touch their face while getting their food, because again, that'll prevent the respiratory droplets from getting into any of the food dishes that you've prepared.
That is a great tip. So moms out there and dads preparing, go to Pottery Barn or online, even better, so you don't have to go out in public. Get a cute little turkey shaped pump for your hand sanitizer. And that's your new addition to the buffet spread. The pump, wear the masks, and then take the food and board on passing around the plates according to the epidemiologists. Okay, listen, we're saving lives here tonight, people. I like it. All right. So, Dr. Miller, in New York City, for one, and I'm sure in other cities, I've seen this in Europe and other places, they're making a big deal about avoiding indoor dining. And you're saying that ventilation in a restaurant is potentially, moves more and has more benefits than a private home does in some cases. So would going to a restaurant then be safer than eating at home with other people who are not inside your household?
Well, unfortunately, what we have seen from a lot of recent studies is that the highest risk activity is going and doing our favorite thing, which is eating out at a restaurant. And so we have been trying to support restaurants in trying to improve their ventilation. But I think what's really important is that most people in a restaurant are talking and laughing, especially depending on the noise level, without masks for a long time. And that can release a lot of respiratory droplets that then can, transfer around the space and accumulate if there isn't enough ventilation. So because of those activities, it's all of it that makes it risky. And if we could get to the point where we wear masks most of the time and we socially distance and we're not inside for very long and we ensure the good ventilation, I think the risks would go down. But it's so complicated, to have a dinner like that inside.
Right. And so in thinking about mask wearing in a restaurant scenario, I'm just thinking about the service staff. I always really, my heart goes out to these folks who are touching plates and going up to every single table. And, they're really, bearing the brunt of this whole situation. Is it a good idea to keep your mask on, say, when you're ordering your food or when your food's being, plated on your table, as opposed to, some folks just take it off as soon as they sit down? What do you recommend?
I always do wear my mask around servers and as much as possible out of not only I just respect and also to keep them healthy and to keep me healthy. And, I just think that that is a really important practice. In fact, then putting them on when you're waiting for your food to just chat with your friends and family, I think is also a really good practice. And it's not our favorite thing to do. It's just hopefully this will get us through the winter where we can then move into a new phase of this pandemic.
Right. Goodness. So speaking of winter, I want to show you a picture now of these plastic igloo bubbles that are being erected around town in some certain cities by restaurants. You can take a look at the photo, and it's basically, an igloo type hut where people are having dinner. So it looks cute, festive, little, winter wonderland vibes. However, you got to wonder about the air inside that bubble because it doesn't look like there's any windows and there's not much air circulation. So, Taylor, what are your thoughts? And I'd love to hear from you as well, Dr. Miller, on, having a meal in one of these structures. Is this a yay or nay for you?
So I think it essentially would be like having a server come into your own home is the way that I would think of it, because you're letting that person into a literal bubble. And I would say if you're going out to dinner with friends who are not in your household, then you're just expanding this bubble by allowing them to sit in this enclosed space with what looks like minimal ventilation, and you can't open a window. So I would think it's at least equivalent, if not potentially worse, than just eating inside or certainly outside.
Dr. Miller, do you concur with maybe no bueno on the bubble?
Yeah, I mean, we saw one here in Boulder and we thought about going in and we kind of did to check it out. But then my husband made the comment, well, we don't know who was in here last and when they left last. And I thought, well, that's actually a really good point. making sure that there's at least time between uses, and that needs to depend on if there is any ventilation in the bubble. You could make it so that there is some, you could open a little window and I think, you want to think of it like you're in a car, you're in this really enclosed space and not a lot of ventilation. And so being pretty careful who you're sharing that air with.
Right. All right. So yeah, the bubble looks great, but maybe not awesome. Okay. So let's talk masks now. Now, the CDC has recently changed their guidelines a little bit to confirm that wearing a mask is a benefit to both the wearer and to the other person. Now, for a while, they were saying the mask protects the other person. Frankly, common sense was confusing a lot of people because you're saying, how is it not protecting me if it's protecting the other person? So I'd love for you to maybe, Taylor, can explain how are you protecting someone else when wearing a mask, and how is it protecting you? Just so we're all 100% clear on this.
Absolutely. So to give you some perspective, we have been asking our healthcare workers to wear the same masks, surgical masks, for decades now. We know that it prevents transmission of respiratory droplets, and it essentially prevents them from getting into your respiratory tract. The flip side of that is the mask itself, whether it be surgical or a cloth mask, can trap those respiratory droplets within the mask so that they're not spread to other people. And they also don't drop onto surfaces that may become contaminated that others might touch. And so early on, when the CDC came out and said that it was for the benefit of others, we know that it's very obvious it keeps your respiratory droplets in, but I think over on the healthcare side, we were all kind of thinking like, well, wait, we've been doing this for years now. So we were all very happy when the CDC came out and revised their comments and said this is beneficial to both the wearer and to those around them.
Got it. Okay, so now I want to drill down even further here. Let's talk about the fabric mask, because Forever 21, H&M, Gap, Amazon, everybody is selling you a different mask. They're all a different thickness. They're all a different material. They're all different fit and cut and elastic situation. How do we know this fabric mask that we bought is working, and how do we test them, Dr. Miller? What do you recommend for assessing the mask that you're using?
So I did just talk to my colleague who has been researching this throughout the whole summer and is going to release a scientific paper tomorrow on the best kind of mask. So she told me what it was. First. I wanted to share it with you all. So the best thing you can do is to make sure it's really well fitting and it really forms nicely to your face. And then she said that they sewed these masks out of, nice woven cotton that's pretty flexible, meaning it can come in tight to your face. And they made them with 2 layers and then put in the middle of the layer just like a little coffee filter or some kind of lightweight filter. So it was a 3-layer mask that's well fitting to your face, and making sure there's no big gaps on the sides or around the nose. And those are really quite effective, both protecting you and then also protecting others. And they're pretty similar to a surgical mask, which is a 3-ply mask as well. And so you want to make sure that you're wearing these really good masks, especially when you're around people that may not be wearing masks.
Okay, so just to recap, 3 layers it should have, and it should be tight-ish fitting, not so tight that you're suffocating yourself, but it shouldn't have any gaps at the top or at the bottom. So when we look at this mask, if it's only 2 layers of material, you got to ditch it and either put a coffee filter inside it or get another mask that's got more layers. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think you necessarily have to ditch it because it will be less effective. And I think it will still be fine in a space where everybody's wearing masks. I think what you want to think is, okay, I'm getting on a plane. Is there going to be anyone on this? Or I'm going to, where are you going? And you want to have your best mask with you, which is the 3-ply.
Got it. Okay. So be prepared. Like you're going into battle. You want the best protection available. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, this is a great segue into our Mucinex moment. Tonight's live stream is brought to you by Mucinex Children's Free From. Just as Mucinex Children's is free from unwanted additives, let's hear now from real moms, free from judgment, free from pressures of perfection, just real life moms being honest about how they are handling the holidays this year. Here is what they had to say. So Tiffany says, we are a military family in Hawaii, and all of our family is on the mainland. We desperately wanted to have them all out to visit for the holidays, but there is just so much risk. So this year, it will be just my husband, my son, and me, and we will do video calls to both sets of parents for dinner at their respective time zones. I feel your pain, Tiffany. Yolanda says, we are not doing our usual big family Thanksgiving, and that hurts my soul because I'm starting to miss some of my people. Whitney says, we have a baby due in 8 weeks or less. Our family all live within 5 miles of us, but we all decided it's not worth the risk. Each little family will celebrate at home with just the people who live there, with the aunts and the grandparents on Zoom. So if anything, it's comforting to know that we're not alone in agonizing over making the best decision this holiday. And now part of this question, I think, is closely connected to our emotional health. So I want to move now to more of the, social relationship impacts here, especially at the holidays. Sometimes we have family members who do not agree on the COVID protocols. All right. Scientific term for that is DRAMA. I'm sure you're both familiar. That is drama. Okay. So let us now hear from Dr. Paula Bloom. She's a clinical psychologist and frequent mental health expert on CNN. She specializes in traumatic events, relationships, and communication. So essentially, she's a drama expert. Let's hear what she has to say about when your family can't get on the same page with you over holiday planning.
I'm Dr. Paula Bloom, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So, I think that right now we have all of this polarization that's happening, right? And sometimes you cannot get somebody to understand your position, and you have to make peace with the fact that no amount of information you give them is going to make them agree with you. So sometimes just presenting your perspective, listen, we're doing this for safety. I know that you don't agree with us, but we would feel terrible if something happened to you. So we're telling you that we're doing this from a safety perspective, whether they agree with you or not, because it's really, you can't control how someone perceives what you're saying. And so making peace with the reality of people are going to be disappointed. It is what it is. Just because somebody experiences this as something personal doesn't mean that it is. Letting go of this idea that you're going to get other people to agree with you, because right now logic doesn't seem to always be the way to persuade.
So I just love what she has to say here. And it's, you feel like, oh, if I just send my mother-in-law this article about the risks, or if I, tag my friend in this, post about, why it's important to wear a mask, they're going to suddenly, agree with my opinion. It's not always the way it is. So this does create, some awkward situations, and we just have to, try and explain to one another, what we think is best for our families. So Taylor, when you're a family assessing the risk of a gathering or an activity, what is the most important consideration? Is it a scientific one? Is it an emotional decision, or a bit of both?
I think it's really a bit of both. I obviously will always approach it from a scientific perspective, thinking about who in your family might be high risk for complications related to COVID. These are your grandparents, maybe your cousin with diabetes, any of your relatives with underlying conditions, people who could have really serious impacts if something bad were to happen and they were to get COVID. And the flip side of that is also thinking about who in your family maybe hasn't been following the COVID protocols the way that we would like them to. As somebody who's been going out and has a huge bubble, I think really weighing all of those things in addition to the emotional impact that it might have on your family members, especially those who are really isolated and who have now been isolated for over 10 months at this point. It does really take a toll. But I think it's important to understand that the COVID numbers are only continuing to increase, and we expect that they will continue to do so. So even if it's difficult from an emotional standpoint, we know that it's a high risk event.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Miller, I mean, we had, I have a colleague whose grandparents said, listen, we're not going to be around much longer anyway, COVID or no COVID. So let's just come and do this Thanksgiving and roll the dice. How do you, knowing what you know scientifically, how do you kind of weigh that emotional decision versus the, more physical risks?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really interesting conversation to have with somebody. I mean, from my perspective, if my older parents wanted to come over and take that risk, that's one thing, but I just would feel terrible if they got sick, because it's actually not a really very pleasant disease to have. It's really, you can really suffer quite a bit. And so I personally would not feel so great having them have it. It's really high risk to have older people, be exposed in that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what's interesting is, the ability for you to pass on the virus to someone else who may then pass it on to an at-risk person, and you will never know if you were involved, right? So that's why we always have to think of others when we're making these decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Miller, when we think about the holidays, our minds, always first go to the gatherings, the meals, etc. But what about the shopping? I have my eye on the robot vacuum on Black Friday. I'm going to buy it online and it's going to be fine. I'm not going to make any contact with anybody. It's going to be fantastic. But tell us, what are the dangers of the air in stores and shopping centers? Because I'm cringing at the thought of what we're going to see on Black Friday. I'm hoping people are smart about it, but I feel like this is a shopaholic situation here in this country where people can't help themselves. Are some commercial environments worse than others?
So that's such a good question. I typically don't feel at as high a risk when I'm going to my local stores, because usually there's not too many people in there. I know everyone's wearing masks, and I'm not in there for very long either. On Black Friday, I think it could be really crowded, and I would be very cautious about going somewhere that could be crowded, because the more people you jam into an indoor space, the higher probability that someone has COVID, especially in these high infection rates right now. One of the things that is really interesting is a high ceiling. So a space with a high ceiling is actually a little bit lower risk, because the volume in which the released virus has to mix in is bigger. And so the level of virus is potentially lower. So I find that to be a hot tip for people, that if they're thinking about going into a retail store, many of them have really high ceilings, and that does help somewhat.
Interesting. Okay. So you want to go to the flagship H&M. If you must go to H&M, you go to the big one. Don't go to that little mini H&M. You go to the giant one with the high ceiling. Does the virus float? Like, do those particles, like, is it like a helium balloon? Like, does it go to the highest level in the space? Taylor, what does it do? How does it behave?
So it behaves in several ways. As an airborne or an aerosol particle, we know that it kind of floats around, and without proper ventilation, it will float around pretty randomly, not necessarily going up to the higher spaces, but as Dr. Miller said, with more air, and there's more room for it to sort of expand and less risk that you'll actually come into contact with it. But we also know that it's spread by droplets and contact with surfaces. And so I think another thing to consider when you are out shopping is those high touch surfaces. So your door handles, your self-checkout scanners, your cart handles, things like that, you want to be really conscious of, especially, you want to make sure you're not touching your face, you wash your hands frequently. And I would discourage anybody from doing that habit where you pick something up, you look at it, and then you put it back down, because we know that you might be potentially putting the next person who comes by and looks at it at risk. So those are all things to consider.
Got it. Okay, so no browsing. I mean, better yet, just everyone just buy it online. Can we just buy it online? And if you have to buy something, I mean, maybe you buy it from a local store and, order it and pick it up curbside, right? So let's talk about a little more about stores. I want to turn our conversation a little bit to those in our communities who are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And those would be women in the service industry and those working in our schools. So I want to introduce Dr. Janice Johnson-Dias, who's going to speak a little more on this topic. And she is president and founder of the Grassroots Community Foundation. They have an emphasis on public health and social justice. Janice is also an associate professor of sociology at John Jay College and author of the book, Parent Like It Matters: How to Raise Joyful, Change-Making Girls. Now, Dr. Janice Dias will highlight for us how the holiday season is in so many ways propped up by women who are doing the caretaking and providing services in many of these things that we're talking about, like shopping, whether it's school, what have you. Here's Dr. Dias, and let's listen to what she has to say.
Hi, I am Dr. Janice Johnson-Dias. I am the president and founder of the Grassroots Community Foundation. What we know already from the data is that COVID is completely disproportionately affecting women of all sorts. And women in schools, I think, are of two kinds. They're the educators themselves who might work and teach our children and might work in the main office. But then they're the janitorial staff, right? And those women are the ones who often do not have many luxuries. And I think, again, we need to pay attention to the fact that the people who hold up the society, the people who do the care work, are women and girls, those who are at the high school age, who believe they're in good health, who are gonna, go out and apply for these part-time retail jobs or part-time, janitorial or maintenance or delivery services. This holiday season is ripe for exacerbating an already economic and gender issue in the United States, one that meets at the intersection. And I think it's specifically going to rest its head in the lap of Black and brown women who have been for years doing the work that is unseen in the United States, but the one that lifts us up. I do, however, say this: we can do something about it. I never want us to just simply describe the problems that we're seeing. We can pivot on this matter. We can rearrange it. We can decide to do something differently. We can invest in these women, we can invest in the educators, and we can invest in the people who are maintaining and cleaning those buildings daily. So I'm encouraging people, even in the holiday season, to reach out to their Board of Ed, make sure there's a plan to keep both all of our educators safe, but a special attention to those who are maintaining and cleaning those buildings.
So, Dr. Taylor, I think it begs repeating as many times as possible. What is the research telling us about the impact of COVID-19 on Black and brown communities? We want you to say it really loud for the people in the back.
Absolutely. So what we know is that for a myriad of social and economic reasons, Black and brown communities are disproportionately affected by COVID. They have higher rates of infection. They also have worse outcomes. And a lot of that has to do with both their occupation, as you mentioned, in the service industry. And consequently, oftentimes that means that they are either uninsured or underinsured and are not able to get the treatment that we really is required for treating COVID-19 if they are impacted. So it really is critical in order for us to change the way that these communities are impacted by COVID. We need to change the trajectory of the virus entirely, or we'll continue to see these trends and they will likely get worse.
Exactly. And so I think, to follow up on Dr. Dias's point about women working in school buildings, as much as there is a push to keep schools open for so many good reasons, I think as parents, we are all worried about the safety of both the students and the teachers and the administrators who work in the buildings, as well as the maintenance staff. Dr. Miller, what can you tell us is a must for schools when it comes to ventilation? I feel like I remember a parent meeting recently at my kid's school where there was a parent who was grilling the principal about what air purifier we had and what was the filter capacity. And I mean, is there a certain, bare minimum standard that a school should be striving for to at least keep, that minimum level of air quality?
First of all, I just want to give a shout out to all those parents and particularly moms who are out there advocating for air cleaners and ventilation in their schools. And I wish more school districts would listen to them. They are paying attention to the science. And what we have been advocating for in my area of expertise is that we need to hit the target of at least 3 air changes per hour of outside clean, virus-free air in a classroom. And that if we can get up to 6 air changes per hour, that would be great. Many schools are not meeting this minimum requirement already for a variety of reasons, deferred maintenance and not built right and old buildings and what have you. So what we're saying is if you can understand, that you getting to 3 air changes per hour and then add an air cleaner to get up to 6 air changes per hour, you are going to be doing great.
So interesting. Now, the physical mechanics that would be required to achieve the 3 to 6 air changes per hour, is that something you can buy at a Home Depot, or is that like a major construction project in a school?
So the 3 air changes per hour should be being met by the mechanical system in the school or by opening windows and doors. Those are the only options to get that ventilation baseline. And then you can supplement that with purchasing an air cleaner. And we've provided guides for how to figure out what air cleaner to buy and how big, and that's a pretty well established type of activity that I'm happy to provide the links to how to do that. And then you can get one that adds this supplemental air cleaning that can then improve your space.
Awesome. And is that something that people should consider for their own households as well? Is an air purifier, is it called an air purifier, first of all? Is that what the device is called?
I like to call it an air cleaner because it's really just cleaning the air. And yeah, I went out and bought a new one when the pandemic hit so that I could use it in the bedroom that I had to quarantine in if I ever got infected. And I think that is an important idea to consider helping out in your own home.
Okay, now we're all going to want to know, Dr. Miller, where did you buy this thing? Is it on Amazon? How much does it cost? Give us the deets here. How much do we had to lay out for one of these bedroom emergency air cleaners?
Yeah, I mean, they are on the pricier side, so it's difficult for many communities to purchase these, but they can run anywhere between $200 and $500. And I'm a big Target fan, so I'll just say that I ordered mine from Target, and it is on an approved list, because there are lists that you can review to figure out, oh, that air cleaner that I'm interested in is on the approved list.
Where does someone go for an approved list? Is that like on the CDC page? Could you find that there?
Oh, no, that would not be on the CDC page. That would be, there are 2 locations that I recommend. Actually, the EPA has a great guide to air cleaners. It's updated, it's really good. The California Air Resources Board has a great website on air cleaner recommendations. And then also this really interesting industry association called the American Home Appliance Manufacturers. So it's AHAM. They have independent testing labs, and they tell you what the air cleaner performs and what kind of size room you can use it in.
Ooh, I like it. Okay, Target, you just got a plug. All the scary bombers are going to buy the air cleaner from you guys at Target. Amazing. It's fine. You can give us all 20% off if you like. So Taylor, let's talk now about testing, okay? Because I feel like a lot of people right now, I mean, the lines in New York, for one thing, are wrapped around the block for people lining up to get tested, presumably in preparation for holiday activities. If you are looking to get tested in advance of visiting family, how many days prior should you do a test? And talk to us a little bit about what options we have for a test and which is the best, most reliable one.
Absolutely. So generally speaking, we know that you will start shedding virus about 2 to 14 days after you've been exposed. And so we recommend that you be tested 3 to 5 days before going to an event if you decide that you're going to travel or see other family. So when we think about what kind of test would be best, generally our PCR tests, the molecular tests, are the most reliable. There's also antigen tests and antibody tests. So an antigen test will tell you whether or not you have an active COVID infection. But what we know is that they are less accurate than a lot of the molecular tests. An antibody test, as you may have heard on the news, tells you if you've been infected already with SARS-CoV-2. Now, what I will caution people against is taking this as a sort of get out of quarantine free card, because we know that you might potentially be able to get infected with COVID again. And in addition, we don't know how long these antibodies last in your body. So Shelley, actually, before we started this panel, mentioned the saliva tests, which are becoming more and more common. A little bit harder to find, but they're actually usually very quick turnaround, and they tend to be about as accurate, if not more accurate, than the typical PCR molecular test.
Got it. So, right, Dr. Miller, you were saying that the saliva actually has a potential to contain more of the virus than what you could potentially find in your nose. Is that correct?
Yeah, and talking to the scientist here at the University of Colorado Boulder who has developed a saliva testing capacity for our institution, they have told me that they find saliva is a much better medium because you can detect more virus in it, and so it's potentially also more precise, and you can also do it in 48 hours, and it actually costs a lot less too.
Good to know. And so in terms of when you take the test, I'm always confused. I mean, literally every day this stuff is, there's a new report out almost daily now about this stuff. But is it possible that I take the test today, I take the saliva test, but my body hasn't maybe multiplied, or whatever the technical term is, the virus hasn't risen to the level where it can be detected yet? Is it possible that I do have it if I've just been exposed, but I may not manifest enough to register a positive test for another day or two?
Absolutely, yes. So we know that typically in most healthy people, the virus actually isn't detectable through the typical PCR test for up to 2 days. But we also know that you could potentially be infectious in that time period as well. So it's important to understand that the swabs, the tests, are not a fail-safe. They're not a silver bullet.
Okay, so just so everyone's clear, just because you got the test doesn't mean you're 100% safe to go visit grandma. I just want to say that, right? I'm in agreement here with you guys. Okay, so we're going to take a few questions now from our audience. These have been sent in live during our broadcast. So the first one is for Dr. Miller. What about a fan? Should we turn all of them on, or is that just recycling air? Ooh, good question.
Yeah, so I don't typically recommend turning on your fans that, are turning around in your space. They tend to, swirl air around. And while that can make you feel cooler, it also creates these higher velocity airflows that can actually blow virus around. So I wouldn't be using those. We have recommended, and I think it's a reasonable thought, is if it works out in your climate and it doesn't make you too cold, like open a window and put a small fan in the window and blow air out the window, especially when you're sharing the air with somebody, because that can kind of start creating a little bit more airflow and take indoor air and put it outside.
Got it. Okay, interesting. Now, Taylor, we have a question about masks. I know we did talk about earlier in the broadcast Dr. Miller's colleague who is about to release a study. You heard it here first, Scary Mommies. You need 3-ply of material and or a filter, and it has to be well-fitting. Now, this person is asking, is gator style okay? The ones that kind of like the turtleneck version. What do you say to those?
Yeah, so the gator style masks tend to be more comfortable. But what we know is that they tend to slide around a little bit more than your typical well-fitting mask. And so because they're sliding around more often, you're more likely to touch it, especially if you're out and you're touching lots of different surfaces. Your hands are less likely to be clean because certainly you're not Purelling or using a hand sanitizer every single time you touch something or before you touch your mask. So I would say they're certainly better than nothing because again, you're going to be trapping your own respiratory secretions, but they're not as ideal as say a well-fitting mask, a three-ply mask, or like Dr. Miller had mentioned, the three-layer mask.
So I'm just thinking about the gaiters as an option for folks doing exercise. I'm a runner. When I go to the park, I wear the gaiter. I pull it up anytime I'm around anybody. But by the time you're halfway through, I mean, it's completely drenched with sweat and you're putting it up on your face and it's gross. But I mean, is it still doing something? Is it providing a barrier even if it's covered in sweat and you're breathing heavy?
So it's not quite clear, but what we know is that by having that barrier, just that physical cloth barrier, even though you might be, it might be soaked through, you're still preventing those respiratory droplets from, say, flying out and passing somebody as you're running by on the trail.
Okay.
So again, not ideal, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Better than nothing. Okay. And Dr. Miller, for you, someone's asking, is it okay for kids to continue outdoor sports like soccer or baseball with masks on? Asking for 7 and 9-year-olds.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have kids, especially 10 and younger, going ahead and doing these outdoor activity sports. They're moving a lot, they're having their masks on, they're not really spending, long periods of times close to each other. I think if they're going to congregate on the sidelines or spend some time carpooling with another family, or in a locker room, those are risky activities. But I think generally speaking, an outdoor fun sport activity is actually going to save your kiddo from losing it, I think.
100%. Okay. And so someone is asking now, Taylor, how do you think the holidays will impact infection rates? Will we likely see an additional surge?
That's a great question. So the short answer is yes. And the reason that we know this is because we know that as weather gets colder, people tend to congregate inside more, especially if they're sharing meals, if they're within closed spaces. We have already seen the impact of Halloween, for example, on the national rates of COVID. We know from contact tracing and interviewing positive cases of COVID that a lot of them have reported that they either went to a house party for Halloween or they went out, they went to bars and restaurants. And we know that those activities are high risk. And we're just anticipating that with Thanksgiving and the Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa holidays coming up, we're just expecting those numbers to grow even larger.
Okay. So on that note, Dr. Miller, this is one that I got to know the answer to. I'm sure it's been talked about ad nauseum, but if you're traveling for the holidays, what do you do about the plane ventilation? I mean, just pre-COVID, it felt like horrible to breathe in plain air. What do they do with that air? Is it recycled? Does any fresh air come in? Give us the down low.
Yeah, so airplanes are really well ventilated. I have to say, they're probably one of the most well ventilated indoor spaces you can find yourself in. They recycle air at really high rates, and they also use very high efficient filters and other air cleaning technologies to keep the air clean. And so the real risk comes in when you're in close contact with somebody who doesn't have a good fitting mask, who talks a lot, or who isn't even wearing a mask. And that has nothing to do with ventilation. Ventilation will not save you from somebody talking to you 2 feet away without a mask. You can get infected that way pretty easily. And I also do recommend protecting your eyes. I would wear glasses, or even I have a little pair of goggles. My daughter is horrified when I wear them, but I would prefer to protect my eyes because we have heard anecdotally, and also there is some idea in the literature that you can get these respiratory droplets in your eyes.
Okay, so what you're saying is put the eye mask on, pretend you're asleep, don't talk to the annoying person near you, and just shut it down like neck pillow and mask and keep it locked down. And that's literally me every time I take a plane with it. Like the plane isn't even in the air yet and I'm out. So
Perfect.
team eye mask all the way. And I feel you with the daughter being mortified. I make that a sport in my house. So last question for Taylor. How will your family be celebrating Thanksgiving this year, knowing how contagious COVID is right now? Oof, they want to know your real situation, Taylor.
Yeah, so this, after a lot of discussion, my family decided that even though we typically have a huge indoor gathering with about 50 of my closest crazy relatives, it's just not safe for us to gather. And so we'll be staying local. I'll be learning how to cook a turkey as well as some other Thanksgiving favorites, and just spending time with my immediate household and trying to keep each other safe.
Can't argue with that. And Dr. Miller, how about you? What are your plans?
Yeah, that's same for us. I have, we'll just be spending it with our local, our nuclear family here. And hopefully the weather will be nice enough that we'll be able to go outside for a hike. We'll have to see.
Nice. I'm doing the same. I'm actually going out for to a restaurant outdoors. I made a reservation to eat in an outdoor, non-plastic igloo location. I want to support the restaurant, industry here in our city because it's tough on lots of folks. So we're hoping to have a safe, just our family meal out. And I have no problem with not cooking a turkey for anybody and not having any travel involved. I'm totally fine with that. I think we just gotta take a pass at this one this year. It can be really stressful, especially for moms who try and do it all. So as much as it's tough to miss out, we're getting a pass this year, I think, right?
I think so.
Absolutely.
So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to let you know that our next live event will be on December 1st, and it will be about living from work, nailing it and failing it, how to cope when work and home life collide. The Riveter's Amy Nelson will be joining us along with Serene Noor Ali, who is the founder of Sleuth. You can register now at scarymommy.com/live-work-thrive. I think that's going to be a key session for everyone, given that the trajectory of this virus is not going in the direction we hope. So we're going to see a lot more of this at-home lifestyle for the foreseeable future. So thank you to our incredible panelist, Dr. Taylor McAwam. I'll have to check my notes, make sure I say your last name right. Thank you so much for sharing your epidemiological advice with us. Dr. Shelley Miller, check out our website for her full video on understanding the spread of COVID-19. It's actually, I think, great for adults and kids to watch. It's 4 minutes, quick, but really illustrates the science of how this works in a great, concise way. So thank you for sharing that with us, Dr. Miller. We also thank Dr. Paula Bloom and Dr. Johnson Dias. You can check out her book called Parent Like It Matters: How to Raise Joyful, Change-Making Girls. So have a great night, Scary Mommies. Stay safe this holiday. My motto is say no if you don't want to go. Would you guys say that's a good motto?
Absolutely.
Great motto.
All right. And don't go to the store for what you can buy online. It's a pandemic, right? All right. We will get through this because we are moms and we know how to live, work, and thrive. Good night.